I remembered the sleigh bowl my mother had found at the winter fair a few years before. Its reddish-brown enamel had chipped at the end, but she had loved it because it suggested a sense of togetherness. I was stirring the cold potatoes in the bowl, trying to break up the hard, icy lumps. Across the dining room, the Christmas tree lights twinkled in all their colors, and the adults were dead silent, as if the lights could replace broken bonds. The cold air outside the window seeped through the cracks in the glass and crept down my collar. The smell of cold meat and cinnamon candles was the same as always, but the old warmth was gone. Christmas, which was supposed to be a time of reunion, had now become a test of patience. Mom put the roast chicken on the table and glanced at the potatoes I had been stirring. "It's hard to swallow that way," she said in a voice as soft as a breeze. I swallowed my objection. Since Tom's accident, the kids and I had moved here, temporarily, while we sold our Dallas apartment. Dad always said everything will be fine, but never asked me what I really needed. He sat in the armchair, the remote clicking, the blizzard forecast, then the news of the chain of accidents caused by black ice on the highway. His veined hands didn't shake outside or inside. Dad always hid everything behind a layer of frost. Eli and Maisie whispered to each other under the tree, the multicolored lights reflecting in their eyes, but I knew they were listening more to the adults than the presents. At that age, children feel the cold air longer than their skin. Mom poured hot apple cider into Dad's glass, then turned to me. "How long do you plan on staying here? Tom's old place is probably still a good rent." I clenched my spoon and took a deep breath. "I'm still taking care of the paperwork, Mom. The paperwork will eventually be done. Women have to be strong. Steady." Mom used that word as if I hadn't tried. I was about to reply when a voice boom, echoed through the kitchen. The knocking was urgent, different from the sound of a holiday delivery man. I quickly put down the bowl and ran into the hallway. The wind blew snow into my face as the door opened, and before me stood a tall man, his leather jacket stained with dark red. He staggered, trying to keep his balance, then fell, holding onto the edge of the door. The cold and the scent of blood awakened my senses. I knelt, my hand pressed beneath the cut at his temple. The blood was warm and sticky. "Can you hear me?" Gray eyes opened half open, filled with mist, then closed. "I need towels. I need warm water." I shouted into the living room. Instead of footsteps, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and dry as an apple knife. "Don't let him in the house." I turned around. She stood in the doorway, clutching the hem of her wool coat, the floor lamp lighting her expressionless face. My father slowly got up from the armchair, still holding the remote. "Call the police, Cassidy. We don't know who he is." I shivered, not knowing whether from the wind or from anger. He was a man now, bleeding on the steps of their house, the house I had once called home. The snow fell harder, and the wind whipped across the porch, making the wind chimes jingle. I pulled the wool blanket from the shoe rack and wrapped it around his cold body. His fingers were worn, but I could still feel him clasping my hand weakly, as if asking for continued trust. "Mother still blocks the way. Do you intend to let children witness this? People could get sick, or worse, cause trouble." I looked into the living room. Eli was standing, eyes wide with panic, Maisie clutching at her brother's shirt. The floor lamp reflected off the young sheets, casting a light that reminded me that there were moments when the choices were no longer my own. "I'm not leaving anyone to die on the porch on Christmas Eve," I said softly but firmly, then turned to my children. "Get me a towel, quick." The wind at my back whipped up snow, leaving a thin layer on the carpet before my door, and I knew that, though the door closed behind me, I would not be alone. There were things colder than a blizzard, a heart that had closed itself to kindness. Under the cold, wet jeans, I could feel his body trembling slightly like a string touched by the wind. Blood seeped from his forehead, mixing with the white snow, forming red streaks like spilled ink on an unwritten page. I pressed the towel tightly against the wound, my hands soaked but still not feeling any warmth. In my head echoed my mother's old words, the last time I adopted a skinny stray dog. You always choose the lost children instead of thinking about your family. At that time I argued. But this time, I said nothing. I just did what I thought was right. Maisie, stay in the living room. Eli, give me the phone on the table. I called into the house. The wind whistled through the porch, whipping my hair to one side. Mother walked quickly, her face expressionless, but her eyes were burning. Cassidy, that's enough. He's bleeding, Mom. I can't let. It's none of your business. Her voice was dry. This is no place for people like that. I looked up. Dad was standing at the end of the hallway, still holding the TV remote as if it were a shield from all the trouble. You're right. Call 911. Don't make things worse. I stood up, not taking my eyes off my parents. What if it was Tom? If he was in trouble out there, would you let someone open the door? Father clenched his jaw. Mother turned away. They did not answer. I felt my breathing heavy like smoke from an unlit fireplace. What if I bring him into the house? My father looked at me as if he were seeing me as a stranger for the first time. Then you and the kids can leave this house. Tonight. No argument. No apology. Just an ultimatum, colder than the blizzard outside. I turned away. Eli was waiting, eyes wide. Maisie was still hiding behind the sofa, clutching her little teddy bear. Put on some warm clothes. Let's go. I wrapped a scarf around the man and told Eli to open the trunk. My two children's little arms trembled as I held them in the car. The cold air clung to the windows, so thick I wiped it with my sleeve. I tried to start it. The engine whined, then died. A second time, a third, finally it roared to life with the wind whipping against the body. I looked in the rearview mirror. My parents were still standing in the doorway. Neither of them said anything. They just stood there, like two stone statues in the middle of a snowy yard, not moving. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the truth that had just frozen in my heart. Home is not where one is born, but where one remains at one's weakest moment. The headlights illuminated the drifting snow. I gripped the wheel, straining to see through the sleet. Weston, I didn't know his name, but it rang in my head like a sudden reminder, gave a weak groan. I glanced at him, his face pale, his lips dry. Hang in there. Almost there, I whispered to myself as if to reassure myself. Maisie whispered from the back seat. Mom, is he dead? I dare not turn back. No, honey. He just needs a doctor. Eli held his sister's hand. He didn't speak, but his eyes were full of fear. The car entered the emergency lane, a corridor of light through the storm. As I turned the wheel, I heard a soft fall, like a leaf hitting the ground. Looking down at the floor of the car, I saw a small leather wallet fall out of the man's jacket. It was dark, neatly stitched, and clearly not the belonging of a homeless person. I bent down and picked it up, my heart pounding. What had been so simple, helping an injured person, had suddenly become complicated. The dark brown leather wallet lay on my lap, soaking up the cold air that had lingered in the ambulance. As the paramedics wheeled the man's stretcher into the lit hallway, the wallet slipped from the edge of the blanket and fell to the floor, opening as if pulled by a magnet. An ID card was pushed up, the clear plastic frame faintly reflecting the fluorescent light. The words Weston Hays, the bold print, hit me so hard that my heart skipped a beat. That name, which had passed through my life in the form of Tom's nagging words when he was alive, now loomed over my knee, as if he were reaching out from somewhere to remind me not to forget. Tom once pointed to the evening news and clicked his tongue. That Hays development guy, Cass. They'd bury the whole cemetery if it meant cleaning their tax records. I laughed it off then, thinking he was being dramatic. Now, the words came back, colder than the wind tonight. The emergency corridor was blindingly bright, the smell of alcohol mixed with the cheap coffee from the vending machines. I sat on the hard plastic chair, Eli resting his head on his left thigh, Maisie on his right. The Christmas lights hanging above the reception desk flickered lazily, trying to evoke a warmth that the place clearly lacked. The double doors closed behind the doctors and nurses, swallowing Weston, or rather, swallowing the mystery that was his name, into a no-go zone. A nurse with salt and pepper hair turned around, her voice small but firm. The patient's signal is stable, but we have to move him to the federal observation room. Are you related? I shook my head, holding the wallet in my hand, my mouth dry. I don't know him. I just saw him knocking on the door. She bent down to the card, her eyes widening slightly. This guy, never mind, she choked out, closing her purse. I saw her glance back at the counter, where two blue-uniformed employees had a brief conversation, then bent down to write something on a clipboard. I pulled out my phone. The hospital Wi-Fi signal was spotty, but Google still showed results after a few loads. Weston Hays missing, Hays development whistleblower, federal forest land, and the ominous fund. The headlines that Tom had once followed, which I had ignored, now rushed across the screen like a late wave hitting a lazy swimmer. I remembered the last time the name had been mentioned at a family dinner. My father grumbled about the congressman's lack of campaign funds, my mother changing the subject by asking when I would have another child. I avoided my parents' eyes just as I did today, but avoidance was no longer effective. Eli breathed softly, his lips parted slightly. Maisie sucked her finger, the cold making her cheeks flush. I pulled the sleigh blanket over them both, comforting them in a near whisper. Just a little more. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't a winter chill. It was a visceral chill, the feeling of someone looking at me. I looked up. Two men in black coats stood about 10 feet away, too straight to be doctors, too quiet to be relatives. One of them stepped forward, flicking the badge around his neck. Department of the Interior. He did not smile. Miss Cassidy Monroe? Yes, I stifled my voice, keeping the two children within reach. We'd like to have a word. Somewhere more private. I glanced back at the emergency room. The door was still closed. My heart was pounding. But every time I felt scared, I heard Tom's voice. When you can't back down, Cass, you stand still. People mistake that for courage. I stood up, gently removing Maisie's hand from my sleeve. The taller agent tilted his head slightly. You brought Mr. Hays in. That's a nice gesture. But he's involved in a federal investigation. Your presence puts you in a position where you can be a useful witness or a risk. I swallowed, still clutching my wallet. I only opened the door for an injured person. Sometimes opening a door changes the whole map, he replied, his voice as even as the hum of a coffee machine. The shorter guy handed me a business card, unimpressive, just a phone number with no name. We will arrange for temporary security, if you agree to cooperate. Collaboration? I wanted to laugh, but my eyes were wet. Just hours ago, I had been kicked out of the door by my own parents. Now, this door opened to another world where my signature might have been misused, and the secret Tom had warned me about turned out to be more than a passing breeze. When they left for coffee, I sat down, holding my 2 children close. My chest was in turmoil, fear mixed with something like a burning pride. A seed of resistance was cracking inside me, the ground plowed by the cold, now given a chance to sprout. I looked at the Weston Hayes ID card, thought of the snow-covered road in the middle of the night, and whispered, "If you don't surrender, then neither will I." Outside, the wind whistled through the waiting room windows, carrying with it the faint sound of wind chimes, a reminder that Christmas Eve continued, no matter which side of the threshold of truth we stood on. The motel is nestled behind an old gas station. The sign BACNCI pale blue light flickered like a sigh. The room I had chosen was number 12, the wooden door peeling paint, the lock clicking when I turned the key. The smell of mold immediately hit my nose, mixed with the smell of cheap bleach, reminding me of cleaning my dorm room as a student. The walls were stained with water stains, the floor creaked with every step, but at least there was a heater. After everything that had just happened, that was enough. I told Eli to lock the door, then went out to get more towels from the front desk. "I'll be right back," I said, trying to keep my voice calm so they wouldn't be scared. Even though inside, everything was as chaotic as a kite in the wind. We had been kicked out of our home on a snowy Christmas night with an injured man of unknown origin. Every step I took down the motel hallway, I asked myself, what am I doing? Back in the room, I found Weston still lying on the bed, pale, eyes half closed, breathing heavily. Eli sat at the corner of the table doodling, while Maisie was wrapped in a thick blanket, her eyes glued to the grainy television screen. I sat down next to the bed and gently placed my hand on Weston's wrist to check his pulse. At that moment, he groaned softly, his eyelids fluttering. I held my breath. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice as weak as the wind. "A motel in the suburbs. You needed a doctor, but after the hospital found your papers, they called the feds." "I didn't want to leave you there," I replied, my eyes searching. Weston nodded slightly, then looked around, his eyes stopping at the 2 children. "Are they okay?" "Better than you are right now," I said, trying to keep a sense of humor to dispel the strange feeling between us. I handed him the cup of hot cocoa I had just made with water from the kettle on the table. He took it with both hands, as if he were clinging to the last bit of warmth in this world. "Cassidy," Weston called softly, "I am not a criminal. I am on the run from men who would do anything to protect a plot of land bought by intrigue." I was silent. "The man who arranged those deals," he continued, "was named Douglas Monroe." It was as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown over me. The name, my father's name, resounded in the room like an accusation. Weston looked at me, unsuspecting. I don't think he signed it directly, but he had his stamp on every contract. "We found a list of middlemen, Cassidy, and your name was on it." I trembled. At 19, I had signed a tuition disbursement form at my father's behest. He had told me to hurry up and sign it to meet the deadline. Little did I know that I had signed a land transfer contract. Under the name Cassidy Monroe, I had sold 300 acres of forest land to a company that I now knew was a front. I opened my laptop and used the motel's weak Wi-Fi to search for my name and deed. The page that appeared was a PDF contract, signed by me, inexperienced, but undeniably. I turned to Weston, feeling both betrayed and confused. "It's not just my land that's being taken," Weston said, his eyes glowing under the dim fluorescent lights. "They take advantage of people like you, young, trusting, and not reading the fine print." I looked over at Eli and Maisie, asleep under the covers. My heart sank. If I stayed silent, Would my children be dragged into the same cycle one day? Weston placed his hands on the edge of the table, his voice firm. I owe you a debt of gratitude tonight. But if you're ready, I think it's time we took back what's ours. I nodded. Not because I believed Weston, but because I was tired of putting my head down. I had come far enough to know that if I didn't stop and face it, no one would. The motel clerk, a young man with a pea-sized nose ring, slid my card the first time, and the machine made a beeping sound. Beep dry. He looked at the screen, tried again. Beep second time. He looked up, trying to smile politely. Ma'am, card not accepted. I give the second card. Beep, refused. The same thing happened to both the debit card and the backup card. He lowered his voice. Maybe the bank locked it due to suspected fraud. They usually do that during holidays. I thanked him, stuffing the useless plastic into my wallet, my pulse pounding behind my ears. My heart took me back to that evening 2 years ago, right after Tom's funeral. My father said to me, "The puppet's account is like an old fishing line. Let me delegate management, and you'll worry less." I signed, eyes blurred with tears, not knowing that the string would bind me to this day. The sky was gray in late winter. I carried Maisie and Eli to the drugstore across the street to buy Band-Aids and milk. The store belonged to Elsie, a thin German widow who had stopped me to chat when I was pregnant. She recognized me and smiled, but when I swiped her card, her face fell. "Cass, the system says your account is temporarily locked. Can you use cash?" I rummaged through my pockets and found only a few coins left, blushing. She pulled the cash register curtain halfway down and lowered her voice. "Your father called me first. He said your finances were in chaos and advised me to keep my distance to avoid trouble." My heart sank. Instead of ice and milk, I asked for 2 packets of the cheapest cocoa powder in pennies, promising to return to pay. Elsie put her hand on the back of my hand, cold and trembling. "I believe you, but I still have this small shop to support myself." I returned to room 12. Weston was sitting propped up against a pillow, his eyes red but alert. He saw me tucking 2 packets of cocoa into my pocket and understood. "Is the card locked?" I nodded, putting the empty bag on the table. "My father controls everything. He says it's for my good." Weston gestured to sit down on the edge of the bed. The yellow light illuminated the white bands on his temples, making his tired face look more seasoned. "Last year, I investigated a chain of shell companies that bought cheap agricultural land and then transferred it to investment funds. My name was removed from the payroll and my account evaporated overnight. I understand the feeling of having your lifeline cut off." I smiled faintly. "Do you know how to survive?" "Yes." Weston lowered his voice. "An old friend, a forensic accountant, owes me a favor. Not officially, but he's as good at tracking money as a hunter is at tracking deer." I leaned back in my chair and glanced over at my 2 children coloring in the corner. Crayons had smeared onto my daughter's sleeve, a tiny stain that reminded me that they needed me to be strong, not polite. I opened my laptop, went to the bank page, a bright red message, "Account temporarily frozen according to guardianship agreement number, signed by Douglas Monroe." I clicked on authorization. A PDF appeared, the power of attorney I had signed, giving my father the authority to manage all transactions for the welfare of the family. In the appendix, the name Clinton Farms, a parcel of land in the Highlands I had never heard of, transferred by the digital signature of Cassidy Monroe. I pointed at the screen to Weston. He nodded, squinting. He used her name as a front to launder money from agricultural land. Land was not an asset, but a pawn. When he sold the land, the money went into his own fund, and her name was on it, so the records were clean. He still held the reins. My blood was roaring in my ears. The musty smell of the room was gone. Only the metallic scent of anger remained. I closed the laptop and looked up at Weston. Can I get it back? If you have original evidence and a bold enough accountant. Yes, I nodded, feeling like I was pressing the start button on a bulldozer, ready to plow through the tracks my father had left behind. Late that night, Weston called an anonymous number, spoke a few short sentences to the person on the other end, and quickly read the symbols. He hung up and turned to. He will come at dawn. But before that, he looked deep into my eyes. I need to know. Why you? Why is your family in the middle of this storm? I held my breath, looking at the shadows of my 2 children sleeping curled up under the striped blanket. I want to know too. And I will ask my father directly, when I have enough evidence and enough money to buy breakfast for my children. Weston nodded, a fierce light flashing through his tired eyes. Outside, the wind whipped the CDVS and made the lights flicker, but I understood. Tonight the light of determination in both of us was turned on, and my father could hardly turn it off again. Carla used to joke that if I called her in tears, even in the middle of a meeting with the governor, she would excuse herself to go to the bathroom and disappear. I didn't cry this morning, but my hoarse voice from staying up all night was enough to make Carla drop her state budget papers and drive 40 miles over the icy mountain pass to meet me. Coffee shop Pine Co nestled next to the town's ski slopes. Inside, a pinestone fireplace smelled of warm pine and thick pine chairs with checkered cushions. Photographs of skiers hung on the walls, along with a frayed map of Jackson Hole. Snow was falling sporadically by the windows, and pale sunlight shone on the oiled table. Eli and Maisie sat in the corner of the carpeted play area, pushing a toy train around the edge, occasionally glancing over to see if their mother was still there. Weston, his head wrapped in a thinner bandage, sat on a bench against the wall, a mug of black coffee in one hand, his eyes trained on the window with a wary eye. He said he would leave Carla and I alone, but his quiet presence was an anchor that kept me from rocking. Carla came in, her gray coat covered in snow, her red hair tied loosely. She didn't greet me, she just opened her arms and hugged me tightly, just like when we stayed up all night studying for the Constitution. When she sat down, she brushed away the snow from her hair and opened her career tablet. "Send me 3 parcel numbers and a power of attorney," she said quickly, her fingers swiping across the screen. "I'm in the state database." "Hang on." On the table, cinnamon coffee steamed and mingled with the scent of baked apples. I clasped my hands around the mug, feeling my heart pound with every touch of Carla's fingers. Finally she stopped, frowning. "Cass," Carla handed me the screen, "your name is on 3 parcels, 1 in Sublette County, 2 in the Bridger-Teton Range. The total assessed value is nearly $700,000. But this," she zoomed in on the notes, "the dispute is temporarily closed for a lack of a receivership." I choked. Carla tapped lightly. "The authorized representative is Douglas Monroe." "That is." "I'm angry at my father." I finished the sentence, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the blazing fireplace. Carla sighed. "Cass, I've seen this model before. Create a shell company, change the name of the person in charge, take out a mortgage, then sell it. The land goes around, the money goes into someone's pocket." She glanced at Weston. "Sound familiar?" Weston put down his cup, his voice hoarse. "Her father is Fixer. I came across his name when I checked the initials list. When I was about to report it, the entire file was lost at the home office." I looked at you, then at Weston, feeling both humiliated and relieved. It turned out I wasn't the only one who felt this secret was heavy. Carla pulled a brown leather folder out of her bag. I took the morning off, but I have to go back to a meeting this afternoon. I did manage to back up the internal portal, though. Here's a temporary copy. She flipped the cover over to the first page, titled Statement of Beneficial Ownership. Beneath it, my signature, again, in the neat, emotionless Cassidy Monroe handwriting. I'm not signing, I said softly but firmly. Carla nodded. I believe it. The problem is that to prove it is a forgery, we have to compare the original handwriting data. We can apply for a warrant, but when we start, the others will smell the noise. The other one? I asked. The companies that hold the promissory note, a law firm in Cheyenne, and the Federal Forest Department. They're used to closing cases for lack of documentation. If you stir things up, they'll shut up early to avoid the compensation. Carla sipped her espresso, her face darkening. If you go big, Cass, they'll strike first. I put down my cinnamon roll and looked across the playroom. Eli was showing his sister how to paint the icing blue. They still trusted their mother to handle the adult world. I pursed my lips and turned back. Then I'll go first. Carla raised an eyebrow. You have a plan? Weston clasped his hands together and said slowly, I still have the encrypted hard drive with the names of the mortgages related to the agricultural land. There is a digital signature that matches the one on Cassidy's contract. If it matches, we can prove the money laundering pattern. Carla whistled softly. Where is that hard drive? In an old friend's safe, Weston replied. I ran away without taking it. Now he owes me his life, and I'll give it to him. Carla closed her tablet. Good. I need to check before I get a warrant. Then we can make it public enough for anyone who wants to suppress us to show their faces. I sighed, for the first time feeling less alone on this board. But Weston, I looked straight at him. Before I go any further, I need to know, why you? Why is my family in the middle of this storm? Weston leaned back, his eyes on the window where the snow was drifting. Because, he said, his voice warm and tinged with pain, I lost everything when I opened my mouth. And the first person to sign the petition, to help them clean up the papers, it was you, even though you didn't know it. They used you as a shield. He paused, placing his hand on the table near mine. Now, if you want to remove that shield, I'll tell you everything I lost and how to get it back. I looked at his calloused hands, then at Carla, my friend who had put her trust in me unconditionally. Outside, children were laughing on the ski slopes. I took a deep breath, smelled the warm pine, and understood. My father's silent game was overdue. Before leaving the table, I said clearly, Then let's begin. And this time, I won't sign anything in the dark. I grew up with dirt under my fingernails and oil in my lungs, Weston said, staring out the motel's tiny window. Outside, the winter night stretched silent, save for the streetlights that flickered through the snow. I knew what land meant, before I knew what politics meant. The room was all we had. Eli and Maisie were fast asleep, curled up in little cocoons on the other bed, their hands clasped together as if the world outside might shatter at any moment. I leaned back in the rickety wooden chair, pulled my woolen robe close around me, and listened to him. For the first time, I listened not just with my ears, but with a growing trust. My family had 300 acres of beans, Weston began. My father was a tough guy, but he believed in the land like other people believe in God. We weren't rich, but we had the land. We had the say, until they came. I didn't ask who they were. I gradually understood. First there was an investment invitation. Then they offered to withdraw the urban renewal. Then suddenly, the tax bill increased. There were strange signatures on the papers. When my father protested, the documents were lost. And by that winter, we had lost everything. I saw Weston's hand tighten as if he could still feel the pages of earth leaving his family. After my father passed away, I worked for a government land management organization, pretending to be about conservation, but actually clearing land for underground projects. I didn't know it at first. I just needed a job. Weston's voice dropped, seeming to draw the room into darkness. Then one day, I was asked to go through the pending files. There were dozens of names. Cassidy, do you know how many signatures came from dead people? How many properties changed hands without the previous owners knowing? And when I looked it up, your name was there. A living person, but the title to a property they never set foot in. I swallowed. And what do you do? I filed an internal report. 3 days later, I was fired. A week later, my apartment was ransacked. Computers, hard drives, everything gone, except for a copy I hid in an old toolbox at a friend's house. And then, I was hunted. He sat still. I heard his breathing, slow and steady, but not at all peaceful. We didn't just lose our land, Weston said, still looking out the window as if searching for his father in the darkness. We lost our power. I thought I was just some unknown technician who cared. But when your name came up, everything changed. I sat up straight. Why is my name so important? Because she is a legal citizen, has no criminal record, is well-educated, a single mother, a clean record. They use her name to legalize dirty property. She is a white shield. And when a white shield speaks, the whole system trembles. I was speechless. The feeling of being used was no longer a vague resentment, but living, tangible proof. Every memory I had signed for my father out of love, every folder I had been tricked into labeling, family papers, all of it now appeared like a dull knife wound, stabbing silently into my heart for years. Then why are you knocking on my door? I asked. Where else could you be? Weston looked at me. There was no resentment, no drama. Just the simple truth, because I ran. And when I was about to pass out, I prayed to God that someone was crazy enough to open the door. I chuckled, though my eyes stung. You came to the right person. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The shadow of the nightlight cast the images of 2 small children on the wall, like 2 parallel shadows, one memory, one future. I don't want to be a hero, I said softly. I don't want to fight for fame or have a statue of me erected. I just want to believe that I haven't gone astray. That kindness isn't a crime. Weston nodded. You're not wrong. You just haven't seen the light at the end of that tunnel. And if you dare to take that next step, I'll go with you. I looked up, not to reply, but to affirm. Let us prove together. The truth cannot be buried alive. I used to think I was just a single mother who lost her way. But now I know I am a witness. And survivors never survive just to stay silent. Your signature doesn't match. Carla's text message lit up my phone screen as soon as I logged onto the library computer. Some of the samples are a copy from old legal form. I can prove it. I looked up. Late sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, illuminating the fine dust floating in the reading room. The smell of old paper mixed with floor wax. The public library of my hometown had never changed, only I had grown old and lost my guard. Carla appeared on the Zoom screen, gray sweater, hair pulled back, still filing cabinets from the state attorney general's office behind her. I just compared handwriting, she said quickly, scrolling through a series of overlapping signatures. Look at the end of the Y. Your original always curves up. The land contract, it's straight, just like the one in the administrative records from last year. I swallowed. The paper authority the letter my father held out after Tom died came to mind. The cremation smoke still smelling of mourning clothes, the print blurred with tears. I signed without reading it. I remember him putting his hand on my shoulder, his voice low. Dad will take care of everything. You just need to rest. That rest now turns into shekels. Eli and Maisie sat in the corner of the children's room, setting out their crayons to paint a snowy road picture. Every now and then they'd look back, see their mother still at the machine, and then lower their heads to scribble. Weston stood by the glass door outside the library parking lot, leaning against the portable gas pump at the next station. He pretended to check the tire pressure on his pickup, but he was really watching for unfamiliar vehicles, a habit of someone who had been tailed before. "Why now?" I asked Carla. Why didn't they wait until the land was sold before freezing the account? Carla leaned in, lowering her voice. Because the Sublette lawsuit is about to reopen. If you don't sign the amendment, they'll lose your rights. They'll lock your card. You can't hire a lawyer. You can't travel. They'd rather choke your finances before they choke your mouth. I took a deep breath and typed, Cassidy Monroe plus Sublette County deed in the search bar. The cadastral profile page pops up. Status, pending, awaiting supplemental authorization. On the right is a blank space for additional documents. I half smiled. The signature is still the iron bars forever. The only difference is that now I hold the key. Weston stepped inside, the smell of cold gasoline wafting in the breeze. He lowered his wool cap and whispered, "There's an SUV parked 3 times in the lot with dim lights. No local plates." The reading light behind him cast a white streak of ice across his temple, making his face look even more angular. Carla heard the noise and rolled her eyes. They moved faster than I thought. "Cassidy, if you file a complaint, the reporters will dig right up to your shoes. There will be no turning back." I looked at the 2 children. One was coloring a long runway with blue crayons. The other was placing tiny white snowflakes on the roof. I could no longer hold back. "Go ahead," I said. "Get the paperwork ready. We'll file the formal application." Carla nodded, starting to open the electronic form. "Name of complaint?" I answered firmly. "Forgery of signatures, appropriation of property, money laundering through agricultural land transactions." Weston set the USB on the wooden table. "In here are the hidden mortgage statements and a scan of the original contract, enough to force them to consider a grand jury." I took the small drive, feeling the weight not of the metal but of the years Weston had been hunted. 30 minutes later, we were at the county reception desk. The clerk, name tag Harper, looked at the preliminary file and looked at me through the thin glasses. "From now on, you will be the one the public asks about. Do you agree?" I signed the submission box, my own handwriting, slightly curved at the end, and shivered for a moment, then steadied. Weston stood behind her, not touching but present like a wooden post against the wind. Harper stapled the paper and stamped it with a red seal. "If what you say is true," she paused, tilting her head, "this won't stop at the local level." I took a deep breath and answered softly but clearly, "I never thought it was just a local matter." As I turned away, I caught my reflection in the lobby glass, a thin face, streaked with undyed gray, but my eyes no longer lost. I smiled a small smile, the first one directed at myself in years, and pushed open the door into the windy hallway. Outside, the snow was falling more lightly. I heard Carla on the phone. "I'm sending the file to the feds tonight." Weston pulled his collar up, covering the bandages, looking ready to walk another 100 miles of ice. In the rustle of papers and the click of pens closing, I knew The choice was back in my hands. And no one, not even my father, could freeze it a second time. I parked my old pickup under the leafless maples in front of the county courthouse. As I got out, a silver-haired woman in a blue wool scarf walked by and looked up slightly. "We've been waiting for someone like you." She didn't stop or look back, but her words rang out in the cold air like a slow-toned bronze bell. This town used to be a place I believed would be unchanging. The main slope leading down to the small paved square, the ice cream parlor that gave out free popcorn every baseball season, the old streetlight that flickered on snowy nights. Now the flower beds in front of the town hall were faded. The rusted bulletin board was covered with flyers for farm equipment. Something in this town, like an underground aquifer, was bleeding beneath the seemingly peaceful green grass. Holding his sister's hand, Eli followed me up the stone steps, his eyes darting around as he tried to piece together Christmas memories with the bleak winter landscape. I took a deep breath and opened the heavy wooden door to the storage room. Inside, the boiler was humming, and the smell of damp paper and glue mingled with the smell of wood. I handed over the request for a copy of the zoning map. The young secretary with the chain-link glasses read my name, then paused. I saw her glance quickly at the bench where 2 old men with white hair were chatting. One of them recognized me and lifted his cap to greet me. It was Aunt Ruby, the neighbor who had taught me how to saddle a pony when I was 14. She came over, her voice hoarse from smoking. "You're back, Cass?" "Yes, I need some files," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. He bent down lower and whispered. "My wife lost her land after signing the same paper as the girl." I didn't dare sue because the paper had my hand on it, but I knew that piece of land had never left my hands until the envelope appeared. I tightened my grip on my bag. I wasn't the only one being pushed out of the decision. Behind us, the elementary school teacher, Mrs. Jean, was shaking with her cup of coffee. She touched my shoulder lightly. "Monroe girl, don't let them silence your voice. The younger generation needs someone to break new ground." The words were warmer than a heater. I signed the receipt, received the stack of rezoning maps posted in 2016. The paper was yellow with age, the ink faded at the corners, but the red boxes marking the tracts of land around town were still clearly visible. The owners' names were faintly printed, and among the familiar-looking names, the line Cassidy M. Monroe appeared on land I had never heard of. On the margin of the map, a pencil scrawled the words, Phase 1 Trial, Residential Restructuring. I stood still, listening to the sound of my heart and the zipper of a stranger's coat at the same time. The image of my father, his eyes, not angry, not loving, just cold as a report, came flooding back. Could it be that the village I loved had become a backyard for someone's game? I picked up the phone and called Carla. On the second ring, she picked up, breathing heavily, probably in a meeting. "Are you okay, Cass?" I found the zoning map. My name is on a strange plot of land, marked Phase 1 Test. There's a chance they're using the whole town as a transfer model lab. Carla was silent for a moment, the sound of paper rustling through the speaker. If so, this is no longer an individual case. It is a collective action, civil rights, income discrimination. Pushing it to the federal level is certain. I guess they are targeting the elderly, less vocal community. I looked at Ruby and Jean, feeling anger rising like a hot spring under the ice, and we are the first wave. Carla lowered her voice. "Send me the scans now. I'll contact the Old Farmers Association. But Cass, after this, they won't be playing around anymore." I hung up. Weston came in from the hallway, holding 2 cups of fresh cocoa for the kids. He cocked his head, his eyes questioning. I held out the map. He scanned it, his mouth tight. Wordlessly, I knew he had seen the familiar pattern in his stolen database. I picked Maisie up, placed a warm cup of cocoa in her hands, and turned toward the door. The woman in the scarf stood on the steps, nodding at me, her gaze both hopeful and sobbing. I smiled back, feeling for the first time that my voice was no longer alone. And as the wind blew through the small street, the snow brushing sharp edges against my cheeks, I knew this battle would be bigger than I thought, as big as the silence of an entire community. A text from Carla popped up just as I was buckling Maisie up. "Your father invited the whole family to the farm for Sunday lunch," she wrote, he said, "to bring the cowboy too." I sat motionless for a few seconds, my heart racing. The last time I'd had lunch with my parents was at Tom's funeral, when my father had stood by the casket the entire time, not a word of comfort, not a hug. Now he invited me back, as politely as if he'd never kicked my parents and me out of the house in the middle of a snowy night. As if the whole thing had been a minor misunderstanding, something that could be put to rest with a hot stew and a few kind words. The farm road wound through fields covered in a light snow, dotted with horse tracks. Weston slowed as the car passed through an old wooden gate. Ahead was a two-story white house with a faded blue roof. The horses grazed behind the fence, and the familiar porch still held the same pair of oak rocking chairs where his mother had knitted scarves. The kitchen where I learned to bake apple pies still smelled of wood and cinnamon, but the air inside was suffocatingly unfamiliar. My father, in his neat plaid shirt, was busy over a pot of stew. When he saw me enter, he smiled kindly. "I made your favorite." The words took me by surprise, not because of the food, but because of the false familiarity in his voice. Weston kept quiet, gently guiding the two children to wash their hands and helping them to the table. He didn't say a word, just poured Maisie some lemonade, cut Eli some meat. Every action was quiet, but weighty. We sat around a long wooden table, with plates of golden cornbread and black-peppered cabbage. Uncle Hank and Aunt Nora were there too, distant relatives who lived off the maintenance fund my father managed. Aunt Nora's smile stiffened as I entered, and Uncle Hank's eyes averted. At first, my father tried to look interested. "I heard you filed a lawsuit about the land. Perhaps you don't fully understand the documents." I calmly replied, my eyes never leaving him. If there is nothing to hide, then transparency is the best thing. The air suddenly became cold, even though the stove was still on fire. Aunt Nora coughed slightly and pushed the plate towards me. "Cass, long time no see, eat." I smiled and thanked her without touching my chopsticks. My father put down his chopsticks, his eyes serious. "You are digging up things that can hurt your whole family." I gently put down my glass of water and said in an even voice, "I didn't do this out of hatred. I did it for the truth. And if the truth is pure, then there is nothing to be afraid of." Uncle Hank frowned, turning to Aunt Nora as if seeking agreement, but no one spoke. Weston continued to feed Maisie water without interrupting. My father changed tactics. "I have set up an education fund for the children. If you stop, things can go back to normal." I raised my head and looked straight into his eyes. "Normal? You call freezing my credit card, locking my account, and forcing me to borrow money to buy medicine normal?" No one said anything. The sound of spoons hitting plates was like the rattling of gavels in an invisible courtroom. The climax happened silently. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, firmly and decisively, "I will go all the way." Not out of anger, but for justice. And if you ever believed I was part of this family, then let me find out the truth. Just then, my mother, who had been silent since the beginning of the meal, quietly placed her hand on my shoulder. Her eyes were deep and sad, her voice like the wind coming through the window. "Cass, are you sure you know everything?" I turned to look at her. The question was not a warning, but a whisper from a hidden corner. Was there, behind my father's control, another layer of truth that had never been mentioned? I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure either. But I knew one thing. Today's dining table was not just a place to share lunch, but a silent battlefield, where love, honor, and lies sat together at the same table. And I, the one who had been pushed out of this very house, had returned, this time not to ask permission, but to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Carla's message flashed on my screen just as I was putting the kettle on in the ground floor cafeteria of the old main building, which she had turned into a makeshift office. "It's official. The ink isn't yours." Forensics confirmed it. The words were brief, but my heart pounded, like the sound of the gavel opening a trial. The fourth floor, once a tax filing room, had been transformed by Carla and her intern into a war room. Gray steel cabinets were pushed against the walls, and a conference table with crooked edges was spread across it, with zoning maps, mortgage statements, and anonymous fund certificates. The smell of old paper mixed with the smell of freshly brewed coffee made the place feel like a crossroads between past and present. As soon as I walked in, I heard the clicking of a mouse, then the intern's voice. Isaac, still wearing a University of Wyoming Law School name tag, softly exclaimed. "The software confirms that over 95% of the strokes are copied. The curved strokes and Cass's roots are always curled up, while the fake ones are straight." Carla showed me a color comparison chart. Overlapping red lines clearly showed the intervention zone. She spoke quickly, her eyes shining like when she was a student summarizing case law. "We sent the sample to the Justice Department's forensic lab. They stamped it. The signature was fake, inkjet, not fountain pen. Enough to stamp out any mistake." Weston leaned against the doorframe, a paper cup in his hand. He studied the map pinned to the cork board. Sublette, Bridger Teton, Jackson Hole, all outlined in orange. Red yarn connected them like veins spreading through a miniature heart. "The rezoning map matches the tract of land that was sold exactly," Carla pointed out. "When you overlay the loan data, the shell company name appears 4 times. I've drafted a federal filing along with a request to investigate the money trail." I pursed my lips. This meant letting the big fish out. The biggest fish, my father, wouldn't sit still. Isaac was eager. "I just contacted the newspaper, Jackson County Herald. They want to publish a long-form investigative article." I looked at the 2 children, Eli and Maisie, painting in the corner, their backs arched in the daylight. Part of me wanted to be quiet, to protect them from the flashbulbs, from the whispers of Monroe girls betraying me. But I also remembered the look in my mother's eyes at lunch, the look of someone who had been looking down all her life. I could not continue that legacy of silence. "I will speak," I breathed, my voice a metallic tone I had never heard before. "I cannot live quietly like my mother did." Weston nodded, his gray eyes softening. Carla turned to Isaac. "Prepare a statement. But remind them, no children are to be named." The landline rang. Carla picked up, listened, nodded, then handed me the receiver. "Herald editor, short interview on tape." A deep female voice echoed through the line. "Ms. Monroe, we would like to confirm your assertion that the signature is forged." "Yes," I replied firmly. "So are you willing to go to court if necessary?" "Ready." The truth is not afraid to be displayed. I hung up and sank into my chair. It felt like stepping out of an ice cave into a firestorm, cold for my opponent, hot for my own determination. Weston put his hand on my shoulder, no words, just the warm weight of a companion. In the afternoon, we packed up our copies of the file, sealed them with red tape, and signed by all three parties, the attorney, the medical examiner, and me. Carla drove straight to the Federal Post Office and sent them to the addressee express. On the envelope, the stamp PRIORIT a crimson red, looking like dried blood on a bandage, Weston's blood, the silent blood of so many people whose land had been robbed. Late at night, as I was putting the kids to bed, my phone vibrated with a news story. The headline jumped up, "The widow fights back, and her family is on the other side." Below, the photo of me holding Maisie on a snowy night was enlarged, and my father, from Tom's funeral, was cropped and placed opposite, his eyes cold. I turned off the light and sat by the motel window. Outside, the snow was falling, and the streetlights cast shadows of night watchmen. The battle had left my door. It belonged to the public now, to those who had been deprived of their voices. And if Weston's blood had been on my shirt, the counterfeit ink was now under the microscope. The blood and the ink, one real, one fake, were telling a story that could no longer be hidden. The late winter wind blew through the slits of my coat, carrying the scent of cinnamon and hot apples from the steaming beverage stand under the twinkling pine trees. The community park that used to be the meeting place for children to compete in making snowmen now had a small wooden stage, covered with green tarps and strung with lights. The ice and snow had been pushed into a path, leaving the grass rough and cold. I stood by the butter cookie stand, clutching my glass of cider, my stomach rumbling despite the alluring honey-rich aroma. Last night, the newspaper Herald published "Widow Fights Back" and "Her Family on the Other Side." This morning, the town council emailed me, inviting me to take a few minutes to speak at the Winter Light fundraiser, a small ceremony to raise money to repair the roof of the old church. "We'd like you to share about the importance of community voices," the letter read. I was tempted to decline. After days of paperwork and camera coverage, I wanted to stay out of sight. But Weston said, "You don't choose the spotlight chooses you." So I went, intending to stay behind the scenes, wearing a woolly cap that hid half my face. Eli and Maisie bustled around the haystack where the PDA had set up a table of colored pencils and poster markers. Weston leaned against a metal lamppost, arms crossed, watching for unfamiliar cars parked along the road, a habit he developed after so many escapes. I listened to the local country band play Ring of Fire, counting my escape routes in case of an awkward situation. Just as the MC, the gray-haired elementary school principal, held the microphone to introduce the brave mother who dared to speak up for justice, my legs went weak. I tried to shake my head in refusal, but felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. Looking down, I saw Maisie's sparkling brown eyes. "Mom, can I say something?" she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "I want to say it in front of everyone." I opened my mouth to explain that this was not a stage for 6-year-olds, but the look in my son's eyes stopped me. I realized, while I was anxious to shield them from the public eye, they had seen the injustices firsthand: snowy nights on the porch, denied motel passes, intermittent phone calls between mom and lawyer. And children have their own way of coping. They speak up. I bent down and asked softly, "What do you want to say?" Maisie replied curtly, the truth. Eli nodded beside her, mustering all his 8-year-old courage. I took her hand and led her up the steps. The warm yellow stage lights illuminated her favorite snowman cloak, making the carrot snowman's nose glow red. I introduced Maisie, then took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The girl stepped up to the microphone, standing on tiptoe on a small wooden box that the sound engineer had just placed. Her voice rang out, a little shaky, but clear. "My name is Maisie. My mom helped a stranger who was hurt, and then my grandpa kicked me out of the house. But my mom said the truth was more important than staying warm. She said if we kept quiet, no one would know someone was being bullied. The park was silent. I saw the principal's lips pressed together. In the corner, Ruby, who had told the story of her wife losing her land, wiped her tears away. My breath caught, both from pity for my child and from pride. Maisie paused, looking down at me. I smiled encouragingly. She added boldly, "I hope adults will listen to children because we can sense when something is wrong. If my mother does the right thing, please don't scare her." The final note lingered on the speakers and applause erupted, not politely, but in a torrent that broke through long-standing ice. The person in charge of the music player forgot to play the next song. The wind whistling through the pine branches mingled with the long applause as if affirming it. A woman in a red coat stepped forward and presented the little girl with a snowman lollipop, saying tearfully, "You're so brave." I hugged Maisie, silently thanking her for voicing the fears I'd carried for so many years. As we stepped down, Weston touched my shoulder lightly. "No matter the outcome, you just saved more than one person." In his eyes, I saw unspoken trust. I turned to answer, but stopped. Behind the lamppost, my mother stood half-hidden. The light covered her hair, no longer elaborately made up, just a simple plum-colored wool scarf. She looked at me, no longer icy, nor did she look away when I caught sight of her. The silence between us seemed to have a different meaning. Instead of a wall, it was a fragile bridge waiting for a call. Before I could move forward, she nodded and retreated into the shadows of the crowd, as if to say, she would no longer stand behind the curtain of silence. I inhaled deeply, the taste of hot apples warming my throat, knowing that Maisie's voice had spread farther than I had thought, and no snowy night would be deep enough to bury the truth again. "Look closely," Carla said, pulling the computer screen closer to me. "There's your dad, signing your name." I sat there, frozen. Weston's hand froze in midair, his coffee cup tilting but not spilling a drop. On the screen was a video feed from the County Resources Office's internal camera, a system restored that had been in storage since 2017. In the video, my father, Douglas Monroe, walks into a small conference room with a real estate agent, holding a stack of documents. He wears reading glasses, walks slowly and surely. In front of him is a transfer form with my name in a blank box below. And he signs. Decisively. Masterfully. "Did you notice?" Carla slowed down. "No pattern. No hesitation. Which means he's done it before." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Weston put his hand gently on my shoulder. I took a deep breath and said out loud, "You not only betrayed your daughter, you betrayed the law." Carla nodded, her eyes as tense as a bowstring. She continued her analysis. Time, employee ID, footage from 3 different angles. Each detail was like a compass guiding us toward the undeniable truth. "This is enough to open a state investigation," Carla said. "If you agree, we can release copies to the media and file them with the civil lawsuit." I said nothing for a few seconds. Before my eyes was the image of a father who had stood and read the speech at my husband's funeral without shedding a tear, who had made me sign an account authorization when I was struggling with the loss. Now he appeared in a fake handwriting, writing my name as if it were a tool he owned. I nodded. "Go ahead. Release the video. And use it as official evidence." Carla and Isaac, my enthusiastic intern, immediately began editing the video with clear subtitles. They prepared a report for the land registry, the press, and my temporary legal representative. As Weston drove me and the kids back to the motel, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an anonymous number, no name, no profile picture. Just a short line. "You don't know everything. Ask your mother." I read it over and over again. Each word was like a thunderbolt to my heart. What didn't I know? I thought the video was the final blow, the last complete piece of a picture that had already been clear. But now, perhaps there was still a hidden corner. Could my mother, who had been silent all this time, who had only touched my shoulder lightly during lunch without saying anything more, hold part of the key? Weston glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Okay." I shook my head slightly. "Not yet. But I think it's time." He nodded, as if understanding that the journey ahead was no longer between me and my father, but between me and the whole truth, including the painful truth my mother may have buried for so long. When I got back to the motel, I sat alone by the window, phone in hand, staring at the unknown number. Every gust of wind against the glass urged me to call. But I didn't. I knew I needed a night to think, and a morning to ask my mother, for the first time not as a daughter, but as a woman seeking justice. I don't remember the last time I sat at this old kitchen table. I must have been 19, just leaving home for college. The pine table still bore the slight burn marks from where I dropped a piece of toast, and the cream-colored wall clock ticked as if nothing in the world had changed, though in truth everything had. Mom poured me a cup of tea. No sugar, no milk, just the way I liked it as a kid. "I knew you would come," she said softly, not looking at me but placing her hand on the old notebook in the middle of the table. I didn't answer. I just looked at my mother's thin hands. The knuckles trembled slightly and the nails were neatly trimmed, as if she were always prepared to face the inevitable. "I kept it all," she continued, pushing the book toward me. "I knew one day you would need the truth." I opened it, a simple notebook, bound in light brown leather, its pages yellowed with age. Each page was a collage of checks, copies of transfer forms, handwritten notes, even faded faxes from 1998. My mother's handwriting, small, careful, almost haunting, was everywhere, as if she were building a map to guide me. "Why do you keep this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mom looked up, her eyes no longer doubtful, only tired and determined. "Because I didn't have a choice when your father took me to the town hall that year. He said it was just a family procedure and asked me to sign it temporarily in a hurry. But I saw the strange handwriting. I knew something was wrong." She was silent for a moment, then continued, "I tried to tell you, Cassidy. But no one believed me. And I had no money, no one to back me up. I chose to raise you in silence, hoping that one day you would be stronger than me." I turned the pages. Each line was a stab at what I had once believed to be family. There was also a printout of an email my father had sent to a man named Harrington, who is now part of the investigation team. The subject line, "Change of agricultural land use. Sign urgently before inspection." "Where did you get these things?" I asked, both surprised and heartbroken. My mother used to be an unofficial secretary for a rural women's association. There were some archives that people thought were discarded. She kept them. Like keeping the last hope. Beneath the notebook was a black and white photograph of my mother as a young woman, standing in front of the farmland that had been subdivided into a resort. She wore a white shirt, her hair tied back, her eyes staring into the distance. I looked at the photograph and realized that this woman, despite her silence, had never stopped watching what was going on. "Mom," I choked out, "thanks for keeping everything. But this time I won't stay silent." She nodded, as if she had been waiting for those words. I stood up and hugged her, for the first time in years, not out of duty, not as a daughter, but as a human being thanking another human being for suffering in her place. As I stepped out of the old house, the early winter sunlight shone down on the snow-covered porch, bright and cold. Weston had parked his car outside, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on me. "The federal court has confirmed it," he said as I approached. "They will try to process your case in the next 10 days. I didn't answer right away. I just opened the car door, placed my mother's notebook on my lap, and nodded slightly. Not because I was ready, but because I was no longer alone. And that, whatever lies ahead, is enough to keep me going. The federal district courtroom was about the size of a chapel, with cream-colored walls and a high oak ceiling. The wooden benches were packed with faces I knew and didn't. Ruby in her baseball cap, the gray-haired principal, the woman in the green scarf from the park, Uncle Hank and Aunt Nora, who sat at the back of the row, looking haggard. Weston, in a white shirt and dark blue tie, sat in the front left seat, watching my every move. Carla was next to him, wearing thin-rimmed glasses, clutching a leather folder containing the videotape and signature verification. Judge Riggs, a dark-skinned woman with a tight bun of gray hair, banged her gavel. Preliminary civil hearing. Cassidy Monroe versus Douglas Monroe et al. For forgery, embezzlement, and money laundering in agricultural land transactions. Her voice was clear, not threatening, but heavy as a closing steel door. My lawyer asked me to step up to the witness stand. I took a deep breath and stood. The hem of the second-hand suit Carla had lent me brushed against my knee, reminding me that it wasn't clothes or money that made a person speak. "My name is Cassidy Merrick," I began, my voice carrying farther into the mic than I thought it would. The echo made my heart flutter, but I held my breath. "And I'm here because silence is damaging enough." I told, without embellishment, about the bloody man knocking on the door on Christmas Eve, about my parents throwing me and my 2 children into a snowstorm, about the credit card being frozen, about the musty motel smell. I told how Carla had spotted the fake signature, how the video showed my father using my name as a blank shield. The projector turned on. An image of my father in his 2017 suit appeared. He was bowed to sign, his head raised to talk to the land agent, his face impassive like someone signing for a package. The defense attorney, a gray-haired man with an Eastern accent, objected. "This does not prove that the defendant knew the offense was illegal." Judge Riggs gestured patiently, waiting for Carla to submit her ink assessment report. I saw my father's expression, sitting at the defense table, shift from calm for the first time. He glanced toward my mother, but she did not look at him. She sat with her hands clasped together, her eyes downcast, as if listening to a song that had lain dormant for too long. Carla took the stand to present her assessment. The original plaintiff's pen is curved at the end. The fake's is straight. Inkjet, not fountain pen. Here are 4 matches between the signatures from 2016, 2017, and 2019, all done by a different person. She pointed the red laser, marking each magnified angle. Behind her, murmurs erupted and died as the gavel struck. Weston was called as a witness. He testified about the farmland being taken, how my father had appeared in a string of shell companies, and how he had been hunted down by the Internal Alert. He spoke slowly and clearly, his southwestern accent laced with the smell of prairie dust. Cassidy opened the door for me. She didn't profit. She lost almost everything. I'm here because her integrity pulled me out of the ditch. The defense attorney tried to prod. Did you have a relationship with the plaintiff? Weston replied calmly, I owe her my life, but facts are not influenced by emotions. The audience erupted in soft applause. The gavel rapped again, but the applause was enough to carve itself into the air. Late in the morning, my lawyer asked to briefly play the recording of my father calling the bank to request a freeze for the safety of the family. The forensics confirmed the voice. My father's face was pale. He stood up to ask the court to speak, but his lawyer stopped him. The judge did not allow it because it was not his turn to argue. He sat down heavily, his fists white. When all the preliminary evidence had been presented, Judge Riggs slowly concluded, "The court hereby orders that all transactions, mortgages, and transfers relating to land owned by Cassidy Monroe or operated by related entities be suspended. The case will be referred to the Federal Bureau of Civil Investigation for further investigation." The gavel came down with a loud bang. The sound was like the cracking of ancient ice, releasing a stream of water that had been held back for too long. I stood still, not elated but relieved. It was only a start, but justice had spoken. Mother looked up, her eyes wet not because of defeat, but as if relieved of a silent burden. The court adjourned. I turned back to the bench, Carla clutching the file, whispering in my ear, "They'll appeal, but this time, we have the whole town behind us." I looked around. The eyes of old Ruby, the headmistress, the mason who used to fix the stables, all touched me with a confidence I'd never felt before. In the hallway, the reporter held up a tape recorder. "Ms. Merrick, how do you feel about your own family becoming the defendant?" I answered briefly, "I lost my family in the dark and found it again in the light. If the price of the truth is publicity, I will pay it." Outside the window, the snow melted, revealing a layer of soft mud, slimy but the foundation for new grass. Weston came up beside me, put his hand on my shoulder. I took a deep breath. The battle had only just begun, but my voice had reached its destination, and now they were forced to listen. Winter had come to a late end in the valley, but the first grassy patches had just appeared on the hillside behind the cabin. I opened the kitchen door and the spring breeze, still mixed with the scent of melting snow, blew in my face, carrying with it the twittering of a flock of migrating starlings. Weston was measuring pine boards at the table. He wanted to build tomato planters for the town children's garden, which we planned to open in early summer. In the front yard, Eli and Maisie were busy in the snow that had been left under the maple trees. They were making a little snowman with black pepper buttons and carrots soft enough to fit noses. I heard my son call out, "Mom, can we build another snowman? This time, maybe Grandpa won't scream." The boy's voice was no longer bitter. He spoke matter-of-factly, the way children speak of the wind. I smiled and nodded. The children cheered and continued shoveling snow. In the spring sunshine, the snow glistened like sugar, melting slowly but surely. On the windowsill, stacks of thank-you notes pile up. Families in Sublette County, elderly couples in Bridger-Teton, a group of veterans who lost their farms but are now getting reimbursed. They send well wishes, hand-drawn cards, sometimes just a few lines. "Thank you for speaking for us." I read each one, occasionally tearing up, then carefully collect them into a Seeds of Kindness booklet for my children to open whenever they feel lost. At noon, my mother arrived. She drove an old car, carrying a loaf of warm cinnamon toast. Without beating around the bush, she placed it on the table, took off her scarf, and sat next to me. The smell of butter, cinnamon, and memories filled the kitchen. We ate in comfortable silence. Weston poured her a cup of tea, and she nodded her thanks to him, a small but firm nod, as if to say, "I trust my daughter, and I trust you." News of the case progressed daily. The feds were auditing 3 shell companies. My father was under house arrest pending a formal trial. Someone asked me if I was satisfied. The truth was that I was not gloating. I felt only relief, as if a long-snowed cloak had been removed. My father had paid the price in court, but what he had lost most was the trust of his family. No court could ever restore that. Late in the afternoon, Weston finished setting up the tomato rack. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. We are about to have our first harvest. I put the envelope in the wooden box and led him out onto the porch. The kids had finished their snowman. He was short and dappled, wearing Weston's old straw hat. Eli waved at me with a pine branch. Name him Mom. I called out peace. Laughter rang through the air like new wind chimes. The sun sets behind the mountains, dyeing the clouds a pale pink and purple. I lean on Weston's shoulder, looking up at the clear sky. Sometimes silence isn't scary. It's a pause for the chest to realize it's still alive. I said softly, half to him, half to myself. I didn't save a cowboy. You saved me and the kids from thinking that kindness meant weakness. Weston smiled, not denying it. He just squeezed my hand. At the end of the driveway, Ruby and a few other people brought trays of vegetable sprouts, saying they wanted to contribute plants to the community garden. They greeted me with familiar eyes, as if we had always been neighbors and had only just met. I returned the smile with all my teeth, the smile Tom had once said had the air of May. I turned and called the kids inside to make waffles with Grandma. As the wooden door closed, I looked back at the little snowman. The sunset reflected off his peppery eyes, making them sparkle. And at the top of the hill, the first to melt, a green shoot of grass emerged, stubbornly pushing up from the last layer of winter ice. I exhaled, gently but firmly. The new season has come, and this time we will no longer be afraid of snow. I am the narrator who accompanies you through Cassidy Merrick's 16-chapter journey, from the snowy night when she opens the door to save a stranger, to the early spring morning when the snow begins to melt and the truth slowly emerges. There are moments in life that make us wonder, what is right when the whole family turns their backs on us? But what moves me most is not the legal evidence or the court's verdict, but the persistence of kindness. It is when a single mother dares to speak up for herself and for the voices that have been silenced from the past. I learned that home is not just about sharing blood, but about having someone who is willing to hold your hand through the storm. And that silence in the face of injustice can sometimes hurt more deeply than lies. What about you? Have you ever felt lost among your loved ones? Have you ever kept silent for fear of offending them, only to feel tormented for a long time? If so, I hope you will share your feelings in the comments section, because who knows, your story might be a ray of light for someone waiting for a sympathetic word. If this journey brings back a beautiful memory in the middle of a cold winter, leave a comment. No point one. Hey, where are you watching this story from? Let's connect with me and spread more kind and sincere stories. And if you love gentle and profound stories like this, don't hesitate to click subscribe channel to not miss the next stories. I am grateful to you who listened until the last chapter. I hope that after all, when you look up at the sky, you will believe that no matter how long the winter is, the snow will melt, as long as we are brave enough to stand firm. See you again in another story, where we have the opportunity to live slowly, love, and believe in the light at the end of the road.